Your text, page 21 of the introduction. Mr. Perry, will you read the opening paragraph of the preface entitled Understanding Poetry?
Understanding Poetry by Dr. J. Evans Pritchard, Ph.D. To fully understand poetry, we must first be fluent with its meter, rhyme, and figures of speech. Then ask two questions. One, how artfully has the objective of the poem been rendered? And two, how important is that objective? Question 1 rates the poem's perfection. Question 2 rates its importance. And once these questions have been answered, determining the poem's greatness becomes a relatively simple matter. If the poem's score for perfection is plotted on the horizontal of a graph, and its importance is plotted on the vertical, then calculating the total area of the poem yields the measure of its greatness. A sonnet by Byron might score high on the vertical, but only average on the horizontal. A Shakespearean sonnet, on the other hand, would score high both horizontally and vertically, yielding a massive total area, thereby revealing the poem to be truly great. As you proceed through the poetry in this book, practice this rating method. As your ability to evaluate poems in this manner grows, so will your enjoyment and understanding of poetry.
Excrement.
So, as we just saw with Robin Williams and his class, poetry has a lot of misconceptions.
A lot of the times, people, and kids especially, are treated to poetry as an academic exercise. And rather than see just the beauty in the poetry and enjoy poetry for what it is, like we saw in the video, they're asked to analyze it, find the hidden meanings, and usually in elementary school, fill out tons of worksheets about it.
Yes, worksheets such as underline words of alliteration, which ones are rhyming, what's the theme. Although these are important things to know how to do and to learn, when you obsess about it over a poem, it really loses all of its beauty.
And teachers typically are really teaching because they know that they need to get the tests taken and the kids need to know certain things for the test. So rather than just letting kids enjoy poetry and starting with simple poetry, they start with really advanced poetry and they make the kids analyze it, and it loses all its fun.
Poetry is a great thing. Well, I've always loved it, and I frankly think all people love it when we're small. I think the rhythms of it, the rhyme, although I certainly don't believe that the only poetry kids should be exposed to is rhymed poetry. I don't think I was, and I think that it's good to show different kinds, but rhyme is very appealing. I don't know anyone who doesn't respond to that, especially when they're young. I think the fact that poetry has the ability to surprise in different ways than prose can. The thing about poetry is, I believe, is you read something and you get this little frisson of, your hair stands on end because you recognize something or you're seeing something in a way that maybe you haven't seen it before. And I think that it has the power to make the familiar mysterious and the mysterious familiar. That's the best.
So, it's important for educators to build a poetry appreciation without killing it. But how are they to do that? The first and most important part is to model enthusiasm. If you love poetry and you find poems that you like, that will rub off on kids.
A great way to start with poetry with really young children is to find the poems that are goofy and fun, like Shel Silverstein, Jack Prelutsky. Limericks are also a great way. What comes to mind the most when I was a kid was really enjoying Dr. Seuss. These poems didn't need to make sense. They didn't need to be all deep and dark. That they were just funny and musical, and children really enjoyed them.
Another way to incorporate poetry into their classroom and build enthusiasm for it is to use oral reading and sometimes even choral reading. The more kids can read poetry out loud, the more they'll fall in love with it. Even reading some of those funny poems can help them see the humor themselves and say all kinds of funny words. And it's important to let kids pick the poems that they want to read out loud rather than assigning them so that they feel some connection to it.
Like so many other forms of literacy, it is important to put it in as many places in your classroom as possible. You can include a poem with your morning meeting. Many songs and finger plays that we do are considered poetry. You can have books around the classroom as well as posters on your walls. You can even put on different desks poems about building and math in your mathematics center. There's really an endless opportunities.
Speaking of that, the final way that you can build poetry appreciation in the classroom is by connecting the domains. So when you're learning about math, find a math poem. When you're learning about caterpillars in science, find a caterpillar poem. There's plenty of ways, and the things that we learn about in our classes, we can incorporate poetry. And not making poetry be its own separate thing, but connecting across all the subjects will help kids see that it really is an important thing to learn about. So now we have different examples of different types of poems. The first type is a narrative poem. And a narrative poem basically tells a story, which is in its name, narrative poem. The example I've chose for this is Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. This particular version is illustrated by Susan Jeffers.
The concrete poem is a poem that is written or printed in the shape of the subject. So a really popular type of poetry is a Japanese form called haiku. A haiku consists of 3 lines following a syllable pattern. There are 5, then 7, and then 5 again. These poems typically feature nature, but they can really focus on any subject. A haiku written by a friend of mine is a great work. It is called, I Am So Hungry. I am so hungry. There's nothing on the counter. Refrigerator.
Hello, how are you? I'm Nick, here to teach you a fun little trick. To have a good time when writing a rhyme, try writing your own limerick. There are limericks of all different kinds, so how do you write one that shines? You'll see that it's cool if you follow the rule. A limerick is made of 5 lines, so listen close to this song. Lines 1, 2, and 5 are all long, and in poems of this sort make lines 3 and 4 short, and I promise you'll never go wrong. You need to be sure and contrive to rhyme lines 1, 2, and 5. Then do it once more with lines 3 and 4, and your limerick surely will thrive. So let these pointers take hold, and if you'll write as you were told, at the rainbow's end you'll find there, my friend, your own limerick pot of gold.
The next type of poem is called a lyric poem. And these, according to Tunnell, are usually melodic and song-like, and they usually describe things that are personal or very imagery-laden. So the example I chose for this is called Woolly Blanket. It's by Kate Cox Goddard, and it's featured in this book, Poems to Read to the Very Young. So Woolly Blanket. I have a woolly blanket, it's cuddly and it's pink, and it's very dear to me, more so than you would think. Whenever I go traveling, that blanket travels too, and if I should forget it, why, I don't know what I would do. It always goes to bed with me, I like to feel it near, because it is so cuddly and so very, very dear. And there's the picture. So that's a good example of a lyrical poem. It's personal, it's very descriptive, and it's something that very young children can relate to. Most children have a security blanket, so that would be appealing to most children.
I've got the mathematical blues. I've been serving time for this so-called crime of being a kid. I've been locked in this room for 6 hours a day and 8 years total of hard labor. I want my mind to be free, but instead I'm stuck in geometry. The teaching staff will feel my wrath for taking me down the wrong math path. I want to fly, not to divide and multiply. I get a bad reaction when I see a fraction. Numbers that are prime don't really rhyme well sometimes. When I have to subtract, I feel like I've been racked, and when I have to add, I get really sad. I'd rather play Donkey Kong than do division that is short or long. This is completely wrong, like my test and all the rest. But I'd prefer to get mangled than find a degree of an angle. It makes my mind tangle and my tongue a dangle. So what are negative numbers for? The only ones I've seen are on my test score. Wow. Wow, how could this be more of a bore? I know 2 and 2 is 4. Do I really need to know any more? They tell me A plus B equals C, but my answer always gets me a D. Superman didn't study no math, and I doubt the Lone Ranger could add or subtract. How many times do I have to repeat what the count says on Sesame Street? I should be playing with the birds and the bees, but instead I'm taking the EOGs. They want me to count by twos, but I've got those old mathematical blues.
Another type of poetry is called the reverso. The author that created these is a poet named Marilyn Singer, who I will be featuring later. She created the works of Mirror, Mirror, Echo, Echo, and Follow, Follow. A reverso is actually one poem made into two. It features one poem written from a point of view, read from top to bottom, and then the same poem read from bottom to top. The words are switched around, and the only changes are in punctuation and capitalization for new reflection. The introduction to Mirror, Mirror by Marilyn Singer and illustrated by Jose Massey. This is also a description of how a reverso works. Who says it's true? Down is the only way to view. If you believe that, this poem will challenge you. Up is something new. Something new is up. You will challenge this poem if you believe the only view is down. It's true, says who?
There are a variety of ways to build your poetry collection. The first thing that you can do is buy a bunch of poetry anthologies. And an anthology is a book of poetry that has different authors and different subjects. Just a whole bunch of poems about a whole bunch of different things.
Another way to add poetry to the classroom is through verse novels such as Inside Out and Back Again by Fahana Lay, a Newbery winner as well as a National Book Award. A verse novel is generally classified under other genres, but each page is written as a type of poem, and it is very musical in the way you read it. So, as you can see, it's written in a poem format, but it is put together into a complete novel.
The other thing that you can do, the other way that you can build your poetry collection is by actually having collections. There's collections by different authors, for example, Shel Silverstein, that we all know and love. Collection by Emily Dickinson. They've selected some of her works that is especially appropriate for young people. And I found this one surprising, a collection from Edgar Allan Poe. It's really dark, but some kids like that. And there's excerpts from some of his stories written in poetry form also. The type of collection that you can have isn't based on an author, but it's based on theme. You can also have collections that are based on academic areas, such as Mathapalooza, math poems, Science-palooza, science poems, or this one from more the social studies arena, Lives, poems about famous Americans. So anthologies and poem collections are two of the ways that you can build a poetry collection and get a variety of authors and a variety of subjects very quickly into your classroom.
The single poem picture book is very popular and great for younger children. Some good examples of these are The Cat in the Hat and Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. These are books that only consist of one poem. They are not a collection of several, and the pictures follow it along as a regular picture book.
There's a special award given to poetry written for kids between the ages of 3 and 13 that embodies excellence. And it was developed by the National Council of Teachers of English, and it's the Excellence in Poetry Award. Various poets have won this award, and two of them are Myra Cohen Livingston and
Marilyn Singer for her work of Every Day's a Dog Day.
And Myra Cohen Livingston wrote cat poems.
We like cats and dogs.
Cats and dogs.
May God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always